Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Daniel believed in love that was built over time. He was the kind who made sure to keep the romance alive even after marriage, even when bills started piling up, even when routine swallowed them both whole. He thought every day could be a fresh start. That's why he did small things, notes hidden in her bag, sweet messages in the middle of the workday, an impromptu dinner with her favorite dish when he noticed Megan coming home tired. Sometimes it was just a foot massage or a genuine compliment while she got ready. Daniel did these things because he wanted to see her happy. He wanted their marriage to be a safe harbor for both of them. But over time, he started to feel like that harbor had turned into a lonely place. Megan began treating him with a certain impatience. Any affectionate gesture seemed excessive to her. When he showed up with flowers, she'd smile, but her eyes no longer sparkled. When he made breakfast and brought it to bed, she'd thank him without looking into his eyes. Sometimes, she wouldn't even touch the tray. She'd say she wasn't hungry or that she'd eat later. And he, patiently, believed it was just a phase. That with a little more effort from him, maybe she'd start feeling the same again. So he doubled down on what he was already doing. He planned a trip to the countryside just for the two of them. Booked a charming hotel, retraced the route they took on their honeymoon. He imagined it could reignite something. But Megan seemed distant. She spent more time on her phone than being present with him. In photos, she forced smiles. In conversations, she gave short answers. And still, Daniel kept pushing. He still believed the problem might be her work stress, her exhaustion, their busy lives. It was easier to think that than to accept she had emotionally checked out. Little by little, Daniel started feeling more like an employee trying to keep the house running than a husband. He washed dishes, organized the week, searched for ideas to pull Megan out of her slump. He researched restaurants, movies she might like, concerts, exhibitions. He bought tickets, but she always came up with excuses. Sometimes she said she'd rather stay home. Other times, she said she wasn't in the mood. One day, he surprised her with a candlelit dinner. He prepared everything carefully. She came in, saw the table set, and made a comment he'd never forget: "I thought it was just a normal Thursday." That sentence echoed in his head. Not because of the tone, but because of what it meant. To Daniel, there was never such a thing as a regular Thursday when you loved someone. To him, every day was a chance to make that person smile. That's exactly why he came home early that day. He wanted to bring her flowers. He stopped by the florist, picked her favorites, and walked up the stairs excited. When he opened the door, he heard Megan's voice. She was on the phone, talking to Claire, her best friend. Daniel thought about surprising her, but hesitated when he noticed the tone of the conversation. So he stopped outside the bedroom door and listened. And what he heard broke everything apart. Megan said she was tired of him. That everything was too predictable. That her husband's well-behaved, careful nature was suffocating. She said she felt married to a program doll whose only purpose was to please. That their marriage had no emotion, no spice, no life. That he was pathetic sometimes. That she couldn't feel desire for him anymore. Daniel stood frozen, bouquet in hand. The flowers trembled. He felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just venting. It was a cruel judgment coming from someone he had, until recently, considered the love of his life. He didn't go into the bedroom. He left the bouquet on the living room table and went to get a glass of water. His throat was dry, his stomach churning. It was as if all his devotion had been mocked. As if every effort had been a punchline. What hurt most wasn't that she didn't love him anymore. It was knowing she looked down on everything he'd done. That the flowers were ridiculous. That breakfast in bed was forced. That the carefully planned outing seemed like acts of a desperate, predictable man. That night, he slept on the couch. She didn't even notice. And for the first time in 5 years, Daniel stopped asking himself what else he could do to fix the marriage. Quietly, he began thinking about how to leave it with dignity. Daniel woke up earlier than usual that morning. He didn't make coffee, didn't open the fridge. He just sat there, arms crossed, thoughts heavy as if each one weighed a year of marriage. As he listened to the sound of the shower, he felt a different kind of calm from what he'd known on other days. It was the kind of peace that comes when everything inside has already been emptied. When exhaustion isn't physical, but of the soul. Megan came out of the bedroom like always, phone in hand, making a rushed comment about traffic. But before she left, Daniel spoke, without changing his tone, eyes fixed ahead. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air for a few seconds, as if she hadn't heard them right. She turned slowly, half smiling, expecting an explanation or maybe a joke. But his face was serious, direct, and the silence confirmed it wasn't a joke. Megan put her phone down on the table and crossed her arms. She asked for a reason, as if demanding an answer. Daniel took a deep breath and replied with the same clarity someone uses when returning the keys to something that no longer belongs to them. He said he'd already done everything to keep that marriage alive. He said he'd always tried to give more than he received, because he believed love needed care. Then he told her about the phone call. He said he'd come home early the day before and had heard every word she said to Claire. He told her plainly that he knew what she thought of him. That she was tired, bored, embarrassed. That she found him pathetic. Megan opened her mouth to defend herself, but Daniel cut her off. He said he wasn't there to fight or hear excuses. He said he'd simply realized it didn't make sense to keep holding on to something where only one person was trying. And that, out of respect for himself, he was ending it before he turned into someone he wouldn't even recognize. Megan stayed silent. She walked around the living room, not knowing what to do with her hands. She even asked if it was because of another woman. Daniel laughed. He said it was exactly the opposite. It was because of her. Because everything he did was for her. And everything he was seemed to be a reason for her disdain. A few minutes later, Megan sat on the couch. She said she didn't want to end it like this, but maybe he was right. She said their marriage had grown lukewarm. That she didn't know what she felt anymore. And that, although she was surprised by the request, she also felt relief. Hearing that felt strange to him. Seeing that she wouldn't even try to argue, to save it, or ask for more time. It was as if divorce was an inevitable outcome. A formality for something that had died long ago. Daniel didn't shed a tear. He didn't expect a genuine apology either. And even when she said, "I'm sorry," he just gave a short nod and went to get the papers he'd already printed. The process moved quickly. They had no kids, the apartment was rented, and everything they'd bought together was divided without arguments. Mutual friends found it odd how calm everything was, but Daniel knew that fights only happen when there's still a desire to make the other person understand. He didn't want to be understood anymore. He wanted peace. Megan, on the other hand, stayed distant. She told close friends the decision was mutual, that they were in different phases, that they still respected each other. Maybe it was true. But what she didn't say was that she was caught off guard. That she never thought Daniel would have the courage to leave her. She'd grown used to the idea that he'd always come back, always try, always give in. And now he'd walked away quietly. Without making a scene, without looking back. After signing the papers, they exchanged only a handshake. Megan said she hoped he'd be happy. Daniel said the same. Deep down, he believed they both needed that break to rediscover who they were, away from the weight of trying to be enough for someone who had already given up inside. He left the courthouse with a new feeling. It wasn't sadness. It was freedom. The first in many years. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that the next step in life would belong only to him. No need to please, no need to seek validation. And that's how he began to rebuild something he'd slowly lost, his own worth. Time passed without Megan realizing it. The days after the divorce were filled with calculated distractions, as if the silence of the now empty house was easy to ignore. She threw herself into work, traveled, dined with friends, updated her social media with funny captions and strategic photos. She seemed free, light, as if the decision had brought peace. But there was something subtle there, something she wouldn't allow herself to name. It wasn't missing Daniel. At least that's what she kept telling herself. It was more like a hollow space, something incomplete, but still far from painful. At least until that reunion. They were both invited to Mark's birthday, a mutual friend. Megan hesitated before confirming, but decided to go. It had been months since she last saw Daniel, and she figured he might not even show up. Or if he did, he'd come as he always was, quiet, reserved, invisible. She arrived in a new dress, made up, confident. She talked to everyone, smiled, seemed at ease. Until someone said, "Have you noticed how different Daniel looks?" She pretended to be surprised and turned to look. When she saw him, she was speechless for 2 seconds. It was him. But at the same time, it wasn't. The well-fitted suit, the slightly messy hair on purpose, the direct gaze. He was thinner, but healthy. He carried himself in a way she didn't recognize, as if he discovered a kind of confidence that had never existed between them. And he was surrounded. 3 women were talking to him, laughing, touching his arm, complimenting his shirt. Megan watched this with a feeling she couldn't immediately identify. Only later did she realize, it was discomfort. She tried to get closer. She waited for him to notice her. When their eyes met, Daniel just gave a polite smile and turned back to the conversation. That hurt her more than any argument they could have had. The man who used to chase after her, who made coffee and wrote notes, now seemed completely at peace with her being there. And indifferent. That indifference stung. Among the guests, she started noticing things she'd never appreciated before. The way he listened to people, how attentive he was, how his sense of humor seemed lighter, how the women laughed with him in a way that used to be reserved for the party's heartthrobs. Her friends whispered to each other about how good-looking he was. One even said, not knowing Megan was listening, "If I'd known her ex was like this, I would have paid more attention." And that sentence followed her through the rest of the night. She tried to talk to him. Brought up work, mentioned an old trip. He was polite, answered without coldness, but without enthusiasm. He never asked about her life. He never complimented her appearance, which had been carefully planned to impress. And that bothered her in a way she couldn't hide. As she left, for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt since their dating days, rejection. But now it was different. Because it wasn't the fear of losing him. It was the certainty that she'd already lost him. The image of him surrounded by women stuck in her mind. Before, she thought only she saw value in him. Later, she came to believe she didn't see it anymore either. But that night, she realized others always had. And now, free from the weight of disappointment, those women were free to get close. Daniel wasn't perfect, but he was rare. And she had grown tired of what others were now admiring. It became a mirror. Megan began wondering when she stopped seeing all of that. And why she thought it would be so easy to move on after discarding him. From that day on, something changed inside her. That certainty that he'd always be there was replaced by an uncomfortable doubt. The feeling that had once been apathy turned into curiosity. Then jealousy. Then longing. And deep down, a growing fear, that he had become everything she once wanted, but too late for her to be part of it. And this idea grew silently every time she remembered how he looked at her at that party. Without bitterness, without anger, just with the calmness of someone who had truly turned the page. Megan started seeing everything differently. The way women talked about Daniel, the invitations he got, the looks he drew. Even mutual friends began treating him with renewed admiration. It was as if he had become a new man in everyone's eyes, except hers, who now only regretted realizing it too late. She tried to get closer more than once. Sent short messages, pretending to be casual. Commented on a post. An emoji, then another. Tried to seem light. He replied politely, without going deeper. Never started a conversation, never showed interest. It was like talking to someone who had closed a chapter and archived everything, including the memories. Her attempts to reconnect went nowhere. And Megan became obsessed with understanding why he seemed so at peace. She started following his steps, discreetly. She checked mutual friends' stories to see if he appeared. Scrolled through comments, tagged photos. Until one random weekend, she saw something that made her pause for a few seconds. Claire. Her best friend. Her confidant. The only person she'd opened up to without filter during the marriage. Claire was smiling next to Daniel in a photo that radiated intimacy. And suddenly, everything made sense. His calm. His indifference. His peaceful gaze. Megan's stomach twisted. She read the comments. Laughter, hearts, people saying, "You two are beautiful together." Some even tagged her, as if expecting a reaction. And she had one. She called Claire right away. She wanted an explanation. She needed to hear some justification, some unintentional boundary crossed. Claire answered calmly, as if she already knew why Megan was calling. Megan went straight to the point, asking if she was seeing Daniel. The answer came naturally, yes. They were together. They'd grown close after the divorce. They started talking, going out, understanding each other. Claire said she hadn't planned anything, it just happened. That she'd always respected their marriage. But now they were both free, and she saw no reason to stay away from someone she admired. Megan stayed silent for a few seconds, hoping Claire would at least show some embarrassment. It didn't happen. On the contrary. Claire used the moment to say she'd always thought Daniel was an incredible man. That she'd said so many times. That the problem was never him. And that Megan hadn't known how to appreciate him. She also said she was happy. And that she intended to stay with him. For real. Megan hung up without another word. She threw her phone on the couch and got up aimlessly. Her head spun with images, memories, fragments of conversations that now seemed like traps. She started replaying every time she'd told Claire something intimate about Daniel. Every joke at his expense. Every sharp comment. Every complaint. All said with a freedom that now felt like betrayal. She felt exposed, ridiculed. It was as if she'd handed her friend a complete manual on how to win the man she herself had dismissed. And more than that, it was clear Claire saw him with eyes she had stopped using. And that hurt more than anything else. She decided to confront Daniel. She went to the building where he lived, waited outside. When he appeared, she called out to him. He stopped, listened. She asked if it was true, if he was really with Claire. He confirmed it. And nothing more. No justifications, no embellishments. He just said their time was over. That she had made her choices. And that he had the right to move on too. Megan tried to appeal to the past. She brought up the years they shared, the memories, her attempts to reconnect. But he looked at her with a calm expression and said he couldn't build anything with someone who had destroyed everything he offered. He said he was now with someone who saw him. Who admired who he was, not who she wanted him to be. Megan stood there, watching him walk away. The door closed like a silent warning that there was no longer space for her in his life. She left with a mix of anger and helplessness. Claire had what she had thrown away. Daniel was everything she claimed to want in a man, but in reality, she found boring. And now, after so much disdain, after so many criticisms, he had become another woman's choice. A woman who knew how to see what she herself had refused to see. And that, for Megan, was unbearable. Not the loss itself, but the fact that there was no one to blame but herself. The days after confronting Claire and Daniel were filled with a silence Megan couldn't fill with anything. She tried to stick to her routine as if nothing had happened, but everything felt strange. The same songs annoyed her, the same shows lost their charm, even her apartment felt colder, as if life had drained out of it. What ate at her most was realizing that everything she once mocked now seemed essential. She started remembering details from the marriage she'd never appreciated. The flowers on the table, the quiet notes, the gentle touches when waking up, the long hugs when she came home tired from work. Things that once seemed like unnecessary effort now felt like the only things that had ever made sense. And they were no longer within her reach. The pain intensified every time she saw a new photo of Daniel and Claire. They seemed to live a light, effortless happiness, as if they'd never been hurt before. Megan watched the images with a mix of envy and frustration. It wasn't just seeing them together. It was the contrast between who she had been with him and who Claire was becoming beside him. Claire smiled in a way Megan hadn't managed to smile in the last years of their marriage. And Daniel looked radiant. His eyes, which once always seemed to be asking for attention or affection, now overflowed with presence. It was as if, finally being seen, he had fully discovered himself. And that hurt more than any rejection. Megan tried to start over. She began going out with other men. Downloaded dating apps, accepted dinner invitations, casual dates. She tried to believe it was just a phase, that she'd soon meet someone who'd make her forget. But none of those men seemed to fit. Something was missing in all of them. Missing Daniel's kindness, the care with which he treated even small things. Missing the way he listened without interrupting, how he remembered details she herself forgot. Missing that kind of love that doesn't try to impress, but simply takes care. And the more she searched for someone similar, the more she realized how much she had despised what she once had in her hands. One night, after a disappointing date with a man who only talked about himself, Megan came home and stared at a rose she'd gotten at the restaurant. It was pretty, but that was all. An empty gesture. She remembered the flowers Daniel used to buy. They were never expensive. But they were chosen with care. He knew which ones she liked, which matched her mood, which suited the time of week. Sometimes, he'd write something on the florist's paper, as if trying to leave a mark even in simplicity. She'd never kept any of those notes. She'd throw them away after reading, as if they didn't matter. That memory brought a lump to her throat. For the first time, she cried for real. The engagement announcement came in a message from a friend who, unaware of the damage, forwarded the photo with surprise emojis. Daniel and Claire were holding hands, smiling, the ring clearly visible. The message said it was an intimate proposal, just for close ones. Megan wasn't invited, of course. But even if she had been, she wouldn't have been able to bear it. That image stayed burned in her mind like a final sentence. It was the definitive end of any hope she might have held on to. All that remained now was a collection of regrets. She tried to convince herself life goes on. That she was still young. That she could love again. But deep down, she knew she'd lost something rare. A kind of love many spend their whole lives searching for and few ever find. She started avoiding places where she might run into them. She declined invitations, made up commitments. She didn't want to see in person what already hurt so much through social media. Some people tried to reach out, asking if she was okay. Megan would smile and say she was happy for them. That she was focusing on herself. But alone, she'd sink into thoughts that spun in circles. She'd think about the day Daniel asked for divorce. The exact moment she realized he'd stopped fighting. And all the times he tried, even when exhausted, to make her feel loved. And she, out of pride, disinterest, arrogance, let it all slip away. Over time, all of that turned into a silent wound. It wasn't a pain that bled constantly, but one that throbbed when she least expected it. A regret that surfaced in ordinary moments, like seeing a couple walking hand in hand, or hearing a song Daniel liked. It was in those moments she realized how wrong she'd been. How she'd mistaken consistency for monotony. Dedication for weakness. Care for submission. Megan understood that some people only reveal their true worth when they're already too far to be reached. And Daniel was one of them. Someone she thought would always be around. Until the day he turned away, walked off, and never came back. Life moved on. For Daniel, in a new direction. For Megan, with a void no new experience could fill. She had everything she needed to start over, but nothing ever felt enough. Because she'd realized too late that real love isn't made of constant excitement or wild surprises. Real love is made of small gestures, repeated with sincerity. And what she thought was too predictable was exactly what she needed most. The kind of love that doesn't shout, but stays. That doesn't shine all the time, but warms. That doesn't impress, but sustains. And when she finally understood that, all that was left was to accept, Daniel was already part of the past. And the future she had dismissed was now another woman's present. One who knew how to value what she herself had destroyed without realizing it. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.